this thing on the radio, and then let me see, how long ago was that? It wasn't this week. It was a few weeks ago. Maybe it was at the beginning of May when they were talking about what was happening in May, and then they talked about Memorial Day, and there were some things that I didn't know about it. Maybe you didn't either. Maybe you did. So here's a reminder. Memorial Day originally started and was called Decoration Day. It's a day of remembrance for those who have died in the service of the United States of America. And sometimes we don't honor it in that manner. We think Veterans Day and Memorial Day are the same when they are not. Over 24 cities and towns claim to be the birthplace of Memorial Day, although Waterloo, New York, was officially declared the birthplace of Memorial Day by get this, President Lyndon B. Johnson in May of 1966. I would have been just a little kid. And so it's difficult to prove exactly the origins. However, one thing is clear, that Memorial Day, and this is why the May 6th, 1966 is funny to me actually. Memorial Day was born out of the Civil War. That's a long time ago. That wasn't 1966. I'll tell you that. So, and was with a desire to honor the dead. It was officially proclaimed on May 5th, 1868, by General John Logan, who was national commander of the Grand Army of the Republic, which would have been the North, okay? And he said this: the 30th of May, 1868 is designated for the purpose of strewing with flowers or otherwise decorating the graves of comrades who died in defense of their country during the late rebellion and whose bodies now lie in almost every city, village, and hamlet churchyard in the land. And so the date of Decoration Day, that's why it was called that, was chosen because it was not the anniversary of any battle. So on the first Decoration Day then, General James Garfield made a speech at Arlington National Cemetery, and 5,000 participants decorated the graves of the 20,000 Union and Confederate soldiers that were buried there. That just ripped our nation apart, was the Civil War. The first state to officially recognize the holiday was New York in 1873. By 1890, it was recognized by all of the northern states. The South refused to acknowledge the day, honoring their dead on separate days, until after World War I, when the holiday was changed from honoring just those who died fighting in the Civil War to honoring, thank you, Americans who died fighting in any war. In the Civil War, and pretty much up until recent times, it was only our men dying. Now it's our men and women. Now observed in almost every state on the last Monday in May with congressional passage of the National Holiday Act in 1971. This helped ensure a 3-day weekend for federal holidays. How many of you get Monday off? If you're working, most of us. Several southern states have added an additional separate day for honoring the Confederate war dead. And I'm going to give you these dates. January 19th is in Texas. April 26th is in Alabama, Florida, Georgia, and Mississippi. May 10th is in South Carolina. And June 3rd is Jefferson Davis's birthday in Louisiana and Tennessee. Even to this day, there's a split. The National Moment of Remembrance Resolution, I didn't even know about this, was passed on December 2000, which asks that at 3 p.m. local time for all Americans, so you don't have to go by Eastern time, you don't have to go by Central, we're in the Pacific, it can be 3 o'clock Pacific time, quote, to voluntarily and informally observe in their own way a moment of remembrance and respect, pausing from whatever they are doing for a moment of silence or listening to taps. I've never done that. I probably won't remember. Maybe you won't remember either. But anyway, that is some of the history of Memorial Day. I think part of the reason it touches me so right now is because we're not in a civil war, but our nation is a mess. I don't know if it's premonition. I don't know if it's just a fear when I look at things. Let me just say this, because today is a Christian's Response, Part 2, to politics. And the first one was government. I'm not going to review that again. Today's a Christian's response to politics, and so I'll get into a little bit here, hopefully not too much. I'll just let the Holy Spirit talk to you about our nation. I want you to pray for our nation. Actually, I think for this point, I'm going to give you the end result. The Christian response related to politics is 3 things. The first one's prayer. Second one is wisdom. And the next one's discernment. If we don't have those 3 things, we're not really understanding what God wants to understand in the day and time in which we live. And anyway, so let me give you the definition of politics, and I'll just get going, and that way I won't keep crying over the past. And hopefully what does not become our future. Definition of politics, it's the art or science of government. Same part of that definition is the art or science concerned with guiding or influencing governmental policy. And part C of that same definition, the art or science concerned with winning and holding control over a government. Another definition of politics is the activities associated with the governance of a country or other area, especially the debate or conflict among individuals or parties having or hoping to achieve power. Power is a big deal in politics, very big deal. Another definition, and I'm not reading the full definitions, you're going to have to go to your own dictionary and find it, but anyway, the next one, the activities of governments, plural, in concerning the political relations between countries. D, the academic study of government and the state. You can go to the U of O probably and study politics. And because we live in a liberal town, you will get a liberal worldview of politics. And I'm going to say it here, if you only listen to ABC, NBC, CBS, MSNBC, you will only get one side of the news. You will not get both sides. So if you do like those channels and you have some favorite people on those channels, I'm not saying don't watch those channels. I'm saying you might want to check out Fox once in a while.
Amen. Yep.
Fox tries to be fair and balanced. They're not always fair and balanced either. I think when it comes to politics, everybody's own view, their worldview, their country view, their state view, their beliefs, their inmost being bleeds into that. So even for me, I have my own view, and I'm going to try really hard not to give you all of it, because you and the Lord have to decide.
Amen.
You and the Lord have to make decisions when you go to the polls, when you pray for the nation, how you pray for the nation, what you pray for. But anyway, let me go on. E, activities within an organization that are aimed at improving someone's status or position and are typically, this is very interesting, this is actually in the definition, typically considered to be devious or divisive. And they certainly are today, if you haven't figured that out. The next definition, a particular set of political beliefs or principles. Oh, that's a simple one. Okay, the last one. The assumptions or principles relating to or inherent in a sphere, theory, or thing, especially when concerned with power and status in a society. You might want to think of that when you hear different politicians talking. There's a whole lot, if you haven't noticed it, or if you try to ignore the news. I don't try to ignore it because I want to know what's going on in my country. I want to know who's saying what. I want to know who to believe and who not to believe. I want the Lord to tell me who to believe and who not to believe. Because sometimes it's very hard. We live on the opposite side of the country. We also live in a very liberal state. And I need the Lord to tell me who's right and who's wrong, and not allow my personal view and skew to bleed into it, which it does when I'm sitting at home watching television and going, that's not even right. I know none of you do that. But anyway, I'm going to start point one. And this was interesting in my study. When did a politician become a dirty word? When did the word politician become a dirty word? Even the politicians don't like it. As we trudge through yet another season of political contests, we find many of the speeches given by the candidates, and watch for this. Watch for this. Many of the speeches given by the candidates use something that is rather curious when you consider the job that they're aspiring to, which is politician. Politician has had the secondary meaning of a person primarily interested in political office for selfish or other narrow, usually short-sighted reasons. For as long as the word has existed, it's nothing new. Multiple presidential candidates have insisted that though they aspire to political office, they are not politicians. Here's some quotes. Donald Trump in June 2015. Well, you need somebody because politicians are all talk and no action. Ted Cruz, January 2016. But voters are far more discerning. They've learned over and over again, politicians don't tell us the truth. Ben Carson, February 2016. I'm proud to say that I am not a politician. Ask when politician became a dirty word, and the short answer is that it has pretty much always been that way. That's pretty sad. That is pretty sad. So it goes back to the definitions that I gave you first, where most of the time, not always, most of the time, people are in it for the power, the money, the prestige, the popularity of it. It amazes me that our politics in our nation have become like junior high school. It really irritates me. Just absolutely irritates me that kids in junior high school say nicer things, speak kinder, say their reasons that they want to be in office rather than it is today. I'm pretty sad by that. The word politician entered the English language at the end of the 16th century and was formed by adding the suffix ian to the adjective politic. So politician. So our earliest known record of this word dates to 1584 when Richard Cozen, I don't know who he is, used it in a in something he wrote called An Answer to the Two First and Principal Treatise of a Certain Factious Libel, in which he said, in which respect we are also taught by Aristotle and the other wise philosophers and politicians that in all laws and administration of justice we are partly to observe proportion arithmetically, in other words, mathematically. It's just the way they wrote in those days. At the same point, a number of other authors were using the word in a sense that is more in line with the earliest one provided by Merriam-Webster's Unabridged Dictionary, which says, a polite person, especially a shrewd and crafty schemer. Let me say that again. That was the first definition. A polite person, especially a shrewd and crafty schemer. No wonder nobody wants to be called that. But who cares if they're called that if that's what they're doing? We got to be careful. We got to be careful. Anyway, I'm gonna skip some other things. Okay, I'm going to say this. Throughout all this time, it has simultaneously been used for a contemptuous fashion as well, denoting a person who is interested in their own well-being over others, scheming and overly given to machinations of politics. The last word on this subject should perhaps go to that famous satirist Ambrose Bierce or Bice, who offered the following definition of politician in his 1911 book, The Devil's Dictionary. And this is his definition: an eel in the fundamental mud upon which the superstructure of an organized society is reared. When he wriggles, he mistakes the agitation of his tail for the trembling of the edifice. We need to pray for our president, our Congress, both the House and the Senate. We need to pray for our governor. We need to pray for the House and Senate of the state. We need to pray for our city governments. We need to pray for the people in these offices, that they are not like these definitions. We need upstanding people to be in politics and not play politics for personal gain. One thing I'm very proud, and I'm going to say it because maybe you haven't heard it, of our president, is that he does not take any money. He is not paid. He has to get paid, and every check that he receives, he gives to a charity. Now, of course, he's got a bunch of money, so he doesn't need it. But that speaks a lot to me. I don't know if that speaks to you, but that speaks a lot to me. Not everybody could do that. Don't get me wrong. Not everybody can afford to do that. Not everybody could do that. But I'm very proud of our president for doing that. I'm also very proud of him for taking all of his businesses and putting them under the control of lawyers and agencies and people that take care of it, so he doesn't have to deal with it while he is in office. If you didn't see that when his lawyer came before everyone and read the paperwork saying that he has signed and is setting this all aside, I believe his son Eric is handling the business side of the house. And yet his other children, Ivanka has closed her business. She's not having any part of it. His other son, that's huge to me. And the thing I do, I'm going to say this because I believe it. The thing I hear when I hear him speak, and yeah, he's boisterous, and yeah, there's some stuff I don't like, and yeah. You hear that all the time on the news. That's true. I don't have a problem with that. But what I also hear is his love for the United States of America. I hear it every time he speaks. And I think all of our politicians should be like that. I think to be in office, you have to have a love for the country, not a love for yourself.
That's right. Amen. That's a good word.
So the Christian response, even to that definition, is, oh my gosh, we need to pray. We need some wisdom and we need some discernment in what we're saying. So what the Bible says about politicians, this is more important. And it doesn't hide anything, and simply because I'm going to get to biblical stuff more so later, but I'm just going to give you verses and that kind of thing. Politicians, politicians, the government says in 2 Samuel 15, 1 through 6, talks about ambition. Evils are manifested by ambition. This is the same for the Bible, same for today. An ardent desire for rank, fame, or power. Evils manifested by flattery. Insincere or excessive praise. Look at Daniel 6, 4 through 15. Indifference, apathy, casualness, complacence, disinterestedness, disregard, incuriosity, that's just curious. Nonchalance, unconcern. People get into power and then they act like that. They're just doing their own thing. And no offense, I want to be totally political today because I'm talking about politics, I guess. I am embarrassed by the Democratic Party today. Yes. We spent $20 to $30 million for Mueller and a team of Democrats to investigate the president, come out with a report that you can get, except for the redactions. You can't see those any more than anybody else can, except for the redactions which are less than 10% of the in the total report. And they were determined that Mueller was the end all, that he was going to find something wrong. After the president and his team have turned over millions of documents, allowed all of his people to go before the team and speak to them, none of them were restricted until now. But why should it be now? Why should it be? Why should there be you answer me. Maybe you think it's okay. I don't. Because if we wanted Congress to do it, they could have done it in the first place. I just think it's ridiculous. That's my opinion. That's not the gospel. That's my opinion. Okay. And yet, politicians, there can be good manifested by politics. Provision, the act of process of providing. They put laws into place that we can follow or not follow. Now, if you're not following, hopefully you get in trouble for it. Good from politicians, which is protection, the act of protecting, the state of being protected. Except for the southern border, of course. We don't want to talk about that. Piety, devotion, faith, and religion. I'm going to talk about the United States in a little bit. Prayer, an address, such as a petition to God or God in word or thought. It amazes me, and maybe I would do the same thing. But if you watch TV and there's an official action, an official thing, and they have prayer at the beginning, I don't know if it's for timing or what, but it amazes me that everybody has their prayer written. I don't know. I'm not that organized, I guess. That's probably why I'm not asked. But anyway, prayer. And then praise. Praise. So you've got both sides. I mean, any person, any Democrat could be using politics for evil or using politics for good. Any Republican use it for evil or for good. It's who it is and what they're doing with it.
Amen. That's right.
And we have to pray. We have to discern. And we have to use wisdom in our voting and in our actions. Politics, the state of politics, there's corruption in it, the Bible says. Incidents. I'm going to give you a couple of incidents now. I just don't want to spend a lot of time there. Corrupt politics. How about Absalom? There's some Absaloms in our government, if you don't know that. Yeah. They stand out at the gate. And when people come in, go, oh, that rotten Pastor John. He won't listen to you. He won't talk to you. He does his own thing. But he was saying that about his dad, David. What a traitor. Yeah. What a traitor to his dad. For his own benefit. Did he become king? Yeah, he did. He took over. David led him. And then it all turned around. It all turned around. See, politics have been around a long time. You can go back farther than that. You can go back farther than David. How about this? I didn't even write this down. How about Aaron and Miriam and Moses? It's interesting because of Aaron's position as priest. I think that's the only reason that kept him from leprosy, like Miriam. Because they have to be holy. That's the only thing that, if you just look at that instance, God doesn't like that. I'm going to say this, crap going on. He doesn't like it.
That's right.
He didn't like it then, he doesn't like it today. And we as Christian men and women, we have to be in prayer. We have to be discerning. We have to have wisdom in what's going on in our nation.
Amen.
I'm not talking about just you don't like someone and now you're going to pray them out of office. But I think if God doesn't like them, we better be on God's side in the way we pray. If you don't know what God thinks about it, just pray that his will would be done in that situation. There's many times, and I'll just tell this to you, and anybody who's been around me praying, because I love to pray for our nation. I love to pray for I don't know, God's just put that assignment on my heart. But many times I will pray that I don't care if Congress understands or doesn't understand the will of God. I pray that the will of God would be done. That they would vote according to the will of God, not according to what they think, not according to what they want, not according to their little temper tantrum, and that can happen on both sides. It just can. So I'm not against one or another, although I am right now, but you can tell. But I'm sorry. But anyway, we don't need it. We don't need it in our nation. And one of the things that I'm very concerned about is the violence on the streets. That's really bugging me lately. Nathan the prophet tried to influence the selection of David's successors. Bathsheba went to David to make sure, because David told her that Solomon would be king. But then there's some ruckus among the brothers. It doesn't matter if it's family or not family. There's some ruckus in the house of David when he's about ready to pass away, and somebody's trying to take over, and Bathsheba goes into him and says, hey, didn't you say that Solomon was going to be, well, this is what's happening over here. And David, bam, got involved again. And he said, go get my horse. I don't remember the whole story because I didn't look it up. But go get my horse, put Solomon on him, ride him through town, announce him as king. Took care of it. Took care of it. Sometimes we need the wisdom of God to come in and take care of it. Yes. Biblical instances in the Old Testament. The Gibeonites. Remember the Gibeonites? Those little sneaky, rotten things? They live like around the corner, and they dress up Like they've been on a long journey. Their clothes are all, they got all the stuff that they were going to throw away and give to I hope you don't give that kind of stuff to the Goodwill. But they were going to give all this stuff away with the holes in it, and they let their bread sit out and get rotten, and they left it, and then they come in and go, oh, we want to treat you with you guys. We want to make sure that you don't ever come and attack our nation, and da-da-da. And so they agree because they didn't pray on it. There's a lesson. They agree because they didn't pray on it, and then they find out they're living right down the road, and they should have not made that treaty with them. Abigail in the Old Testament, she's a smart one. She saved her whole family from being killed because her husband was a bozo head. Seriously. David and his men had been protecting their animals, their sheep, everything, and then they came and asked for some food, and they wouldn't give it, and David said, before this day is over, I'm killing this whole outfit, everything, the animals, the men, everything. Abigail, she hears about it because one servant is smart and runs and tells her. And she is a woman of action, so she goes and gets a bunch of food. I don't know how they can get that much food in that time and day. It just boggles my mind, to be honest with you, because they're making everything by hand. They're doing, they don't have one machine in the place. They've got to kill animals. You're talking major stuff here. And enough for, wasn't it 300 men? I should have read these stories. Anyway, 300 men. And she brings it out, and she comes to David, and she says, oh, please listen to me. My husband, I'm sorry. She apologized for him and how he was treated and said, please accept this gift for you and your men. And he saved it. And then her husband, what an idiot he was, to be perfectly honest, when he finds out what she did, he basically died in his heart and then died physically later on. Read the story. Bible stories are awesome. I talked about Absalom winning the people already. David, when Absalom was king and David left, David's smart. He was a smart king. He did some stupid things, right? But don't we all? Come on, give some people a break. Give some of our politicians a break. I've done stupid things I don't want anybody to know. And yet, as soon as somebody knows it, they blast it out on the television for about, at this point in time for Trump, it's been at least 2+ years. And it's going to keep on going. But anyway, David sends one of his advisors. His name is Hushai, Hushai, in to be an advisor. And he goes in to be an advisor, and he thwarts their plans. Totally awesome. He's awesome. Solomon, he made an alliance with Hiram. Hiram's the guy who provided all the wood, all the stuff. And then he did a bozo thing by intermarrying with other nations. All that seems to be a thing that people in power did back in the day, and he thought he'd just do the same thing. Well, if I marry this guy's wife, he's not going to attack me. And if I marry this king's daughter, he's not going to attack me. And then if I marry, I'm just going to, because I don't remember countries back then. If I marry this guy, he's not going to attack me. So he marries all these wives. He has all these concubines. He's probably a sex addict, obviously. And then the wives are political, and the concubines are for sex. He's a nut. No wonder he went bad. You cannot, let me just say this. You cannot, it has nothing to do with politics, but you cannot give over to your lusts.
That's right.
You just can't.
That's right.
You cannot give over to your lusts all the time.
That's right.
It's ridiculous. Get yourself under control, man. Sanballat in the time when they were trying to rebuild the city. Okay? He tries to prevent them. He sends a letter back. Oh, these guys are Duh, I sent him there. Nehemiah asked if he could rebuild the city. I sent him there to rebuild it. Go look in the paperwork, boys and girls. But he tried. Paul was really, now we're in New Testament, Paul was really smart in his trial in Acts chapter 23. He pitted the Pharisees and the Sadducees against each other in that trial. Okay, now you can use diplomacy, you can use politics however you want to, back and forth, however you want to. You can use it good or bad. And we want people in office in the United States of America, and maybe I don't think I'm the only one, who are in it for the United States of America.
Amen.
That's who I want in office. People who are for the United States of America. I have a real problem, and now I'm back to the Democrats. Sorry, I got to just say it. I have a real problem with them spending all their time on impeachment and trying to get Trump when we have an issue at our southern border with 100,000 people a month coming over the border. There's not enough places for them to be. There's not enough food for them to be. Our ICE officers and our border control are playing babysitter down there instead of doing their job. And the House of Representatives, if you know the way our government works, they have to start the law there, pass it, and then go to the Senate and have them pass it, and then go to the president to have him sign it before it becomes a law. So the laws that are in place right now, just talking about immigration, are bad for our country.
That's right. That's right.
We were in Florida years ago, and we were driving on the coast. I think we're coming back. We drove down to Miami. We were in Fort Lauderdale, and we saw this boat out on the water. And people were jumping out of this boat. And they were swimming toward land. That's the first time I knew that our law was if they set foot on the land of the United States of America, they can stay. And the Coast Guard was trying to get the boat out farther away from land to keep people from landing. I don't even know if they do that anymore. It just feels like it's like, okay. With $1 million a year, which is what they expect for this year to come across the border and be able to stay in the United States, I heard on the news the other day, 500,000 court cases are pending from the last 2 years. And yet this year, we're supposed to have 1 million or more come across the southern border alone. That's huge. And think about the poor towns along there. The poor towns, what do? There are not enough. They're now starting to put up, I heard the other day that they have, they're getting one of those big, I don't know if it's what kind of tent it is, but a big tent instead of a building to house them in. It's horrible. It's horrible. I feel bad for the people. I feel bad for the country. I feel bad for the towns that they're in. I feel bad for the people trying to do the right thing, and all they do is get slammed on television constantly. And basically, it's protect you and I. I never did this because I'm from Spokane. It's a little bigger town, but I know John said when he was growing up, he never locked his house. His house was never locked. How many of you now leave your house open? Even in Eugene. I don't know anybody. Why do we leave our border open?
That's right.
Why do we do that? I mean, people can come and request to come into the United States. They can request it from their own country without making their children. Can you imagine? I cannot even imagine this children walking from Central America, South America, walking all the way up here. And then they come in, they've got lice, they got disease, they got everything else, and we wonder what the problem is. There is a big problem, and it's up to our government to fix it, but oh no, they can't because they're too busy playing politics.
That's right.
And I don't know if you're mad about it, but I am. Politics, let's go back to the church. Politics in the 1st century AD. Actually, I'm going to skip that. I want to go to politics in Jesus' life, because this is going to make it a little clearer. Go to Matthew. You know I like to walk through the books of the Bible periodically, and this is one of those periods. Politics in Jesus' life. I was afraid I would forget, so I just went through the book of Matthew. I know that some of the other Gospels have some differences too that are in there. But if you just go to, you don't have to go very far. If you go to Matthew chapter 2. And when the Magi come from the east, and Herod heard that they were there, and they came to worship him. Look at verse 3. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. A few Magi come looking for a new king, gets the whole political realm at the time in an uproar. The Magi from the east come, verse 3, they're troubled. In verse 12, God gets on the scene. The Magi are warned by God in a dream to not go back to Herod, to go a different direction. In verse 13, God is on the scene again with an angel telling Joseph in a dream to take the baby and go to Egypt. This is called politics, people. Herod then did a search. Is that same 13? 13. For Herod is going to, this is what God says, Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him. So Joseph got up, took Jesus, and hit the road. Verse 16. When Herod saw he was tricked, he became enraged, sent and killed, for those of you who don't know what slew mean, all the male children who were in Bethlehem and all of its vicinity from 2 years old and younger. Wiped out the entire male population in that area, 2 years old and younger. That's evil. That is pure evil. Verse 19. When Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, get up and take the child and his mother and go back to Israel. So they did. In verse 22, when Joseph got into Israel, he heard that Archelaus, who was the son of Herod, was reigning. He was afraid to go there. So then he was warned by God in a dream in verse 22. So he left for Galilee. That's how Jesus ended up in Nazareth. Look at chapter 4. This isn't even the build-up, but it just says in 4 verse 12. Now when Jesus heard that John had been taken into custody, what was he taken into custody? Preaching. What was he taken into custody for? Preaching. You don't think that our freedom of speech, our freedom of religion in the United States of America, it is huge.
Yes, amen.
Otherwise, anybody in power could do this. They've been doing it for years in other countries. We've been spared. We've been spared because we were started as a Christian nation. And that's going down the tubes too. In Matthew chapter 8, Jesus starts teaching. And this was interesting, actually, before 8. Jesus starts teaching, his ministry starts. And you've got the Sermon on the Mount and all that, the good teaching that he did and stuff that we can learn by. But look at chapter 8. When chapter 8 begins, it shows that Jesus is starting to do miracles. See, go ahead and talk all you want. That's no big deal. But when you start doing something, that's a big deal. That's a really, I can't turn my pages. Okay, I'll leave it. Anyway, so miracles start at the beginning of chapter 8. Look at verse 34 of chapter 8. The whole city came out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they implored him to, that was when he healed the demoniac. You know, you'd think they'd be happy. That's amazing. That somebody who they know has demonic issues, he can't even be in town. He lives out in the thing. But this city, these guys, they asked him to leave. If you ask him to leave, he'll leave. Verse 9. This is the first place I saw in Matthew where the Pharisees come into play is chapter 9, verse 11. And they were at Matthew's house, who was a tax collector and a sinner, and he was eating at the table, and his disciples were there, verse 11. The Pharisees saw this and said to his disciples, "Why is your teacher eating with the tax collector and sinners?" You know what they're doing? They're putting doubt in their mind. They're beginning right here to doubt. And that's what the enemy wants to do with every believer. Bring doubt. Why is Pastor John doing that? Why is Pastor Betty doing that? Why is this? What's up with this? When that starts happening, let me just tell you, that's evil.
Amen. Right. Good word.
Now, is Pastor John perfect? No. Is Betty? Probably. You need a little laughter. She knows she's not. I know I'm not. Nobody is. Come on. Jesus was. There we go. If you want somebody perfect, go to Jesus. Because you're not going to find it.
That's right.
I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. We're people. We make mistakes. We do dumb things. Some more than others, but this is the way it is. So if you go to verse 14, the Pharisees come, the disciples of John come, and the disciples of John, now these are like other believers, right? They come and say, "Why don't your disciples fast?" Hey, we fast. Pharisees fast. All the Jews fast. Why don't you fast? There must be something wrong with Jesus. Must be something wrong. Verse chapter 10:17. He begins telling the disciples to prepare for persecution. Gives them some tips. In chapter 12, there's some more questions. The Pharisees are now coming to like most of his stuff. The Pharisees in chapter 12, verse 2 says, "Now why don't you and your disciples do what's lawful on the Sabbath?" What's wrong with you that you don't keep the Sabbath? In verse 14, the Pharisees went out and just a few verses later. I mean, it could be a day, could be, time frame, but it's a short period of time frame. Okay, they've been talking, they've been asking questions, they've been trying to throw doubt into the ministry, and then they come, and let me say, this happens in every ministry.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
I don't get it.
Right.
Lord God, just don't let it be me. Don't let me act like this. Don't let me sow doubts like this. Don't let me be this kind of a person. Anyway, verse 14, they went out and conspired to destroy him. Mm-hmm. Verse 24, the Pharisees begin to say, he casts out demons by Beelzebub. It just goes from bad to worse. It's a little doubt here. It's a little doubt there. It's a little this there. Now we're going to destroy him. So now let's just really say he's not even of God. He is now of the devil. Mm-hmm. And then the scribes get in the act in verse 38. The scribes and the Pharisees, they go to him and they want a sign. Oh, everybody wants a sign. I want a sign. I like signs and wonders. I'll take some signs, but there's a right way and a wrong way. And Jesus comes back to him. Do you remember? It's an evil and adulterous generation that asks for a sign. Jesus had answers for everything. And the reason is because he was listening to the Father. Do you realize that you and we can have answers to everything if we listen to the Father? It's part of that process of prayer, discernment, wisdom. Chapter 14. Now it gets to the big guns. Okay, you got your religious rulers. Well, okay, you got the people that Jesus was ministering to, first heard about him. Then you get the religious leaders up in arms. Maybe they were skipping Sabbath services to go listen to Jesus. Who knows? But people get whacked out about stuff like that. And now it gets to Herod's ears. So Herod heard about Jesus, and he freaks out because he says, did John the Baptist come back? Is that John the Baptist? He killed John the Baptist. And now he's freaked out that Jesus is John the Baptist in chapter 14. Chapter 15, the Pharisees are back again. Why do your disciples break tradition and they don't wash their hands when they eat? It's real interesting. I can actually think of people in the church who do stuff like that. They go from this person to that person, putting doubts in.
That's right.
It's sad, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
As long as things change, some things still say the same. Just watch out. Beware. Then, chapter 15, verse 12, check that verse out. Because the Pharisees get to the disciples. And the disciples now come to Jesus and said, do you know the Pharisees are offended? You think Jesus didn't know that? But now the disciples are concerned because the Pharisees are offended. Why is that? Why is that? In chapter 16, Pharisees and Sadducees, which got together. What's that saying about something makes strange bedfellows? Pharisees and Sadducees didn't even get along amongst themselves. And yet now they're coming together and they're, quote, I'm quoting from Scripture, testing Jesus. Right? That's what it says. In chapter 19, verse 3, the Pharisees say, and they're still trying to trick him, trying to test him, they come to Jesus, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason? And they quote Moses. Remember that? And Jesus answers them again. Just read Matthew and read it with different eyes, just looking at them trying to trick him and bother him. The politics that's going on in the book of Matthew and went on the whole time Jesus was on earth. Why did Moses do this? Why did he da-da-da-da? And then it starts it went back in Matthew chapter 16. Jesus predicts his death the first time. Chapter 17, he predicts it a second time. Chapter 20, he predicts it a third time. Matthew 21, Jesus clears the temple. In 21:15, the chief priest and scribe see the wonderful things he did. What those wonderful things he did was the blind were healed and the lame were healed. And did they rejoice over that? No. They became indignant. They got madder still. See, underneath all this testing, all this questioning, all this stuff that's going on is a real anger. And it is exactly the same in the Democrats today. It's really sad, to tell you the truth. To tell you the truth. I In my lifetime, I have not seen it like this. I think I told you the last time when we were talking about government, when I was a kid, not a kid, I was in high school, when what's his name? Nixon, those trials for Alderman Halder, Watergate happened. And I watched all of those. I watched all of the proceedings. At the time, I didn't know why. Today, I know why. Just to see what's going on, see what's happening. Nixon should never have sent those men in. There's no doubt about that. Should have never done that. It's his own fault. And yet, in this day and time, they could find nothing. And we're still going on about it.
Amen.
I don't get it. I really don't get it. It's that same anger and that underlying anger and spirit and everything of these guys at the time of Jesus. And I'm not saying Trump is Jesus by any stretch of the imagination. You know that, right? I'm just talking parallels of time frame. It was Sadducees and Pharisees against Jesus. It's the Democrats against Trump. And some Republicans, too, because they're nuts. Anyway, verse 21 through 23, the chief and priests and elders, while teaching, now they're interrupting his service. He's teaching the people. They come in and they say, "Why? By what authority are you doing this? Who gave you this authority?" See, it just ratchets it up. Every time it ratchets up. You can see it from 2 years ago, how it's been ratcheted and ratcheted and ratcheted and ratcheted. It's the same. Okay, I'm going to skip. Chapter 22:15, the Pharisees went and plotted to trap him. Verse 18, Jesus perceived their malice. They went out in chapter 22, verse 23, the Sadducees questioned Jesus. In 34, the Pharisees says they gathered a lawyer to question him. Just cracks me up. Then Jesus just starts giving it back to him. What are you, scribes and Pharisees, in chapter 23? Chapter 26, the chief priests, these are the religious people of the day, the people who should hear from the Lord. The people should be in contact with the Lord. People should be praying. The chief priests and elders plotted to seize Jesus and kill him. Judas comes into this scene to sell him out. And then Judas and a large crowd from the chief priests and the elders come in at night, because they're a bunch of big chickens, to where he was praying, grab him, and you know the rest of the story. Yep. All of that crap is politics. And it doesn't matter if it's 2,000 years ago or if it's today. It stinks. It stinks. So, last but not least, applying the Constitution to religious liberty. The courts have found that the principles of a religious liberty exist in the First Amendment. The point of it is, number one, it ensures our religious beliefs. And second, and by religious beliefs, it just doesn't mean ours. It means any and everybody's religious beliefs. Whatever they believe, it's protected. Second, it ensures that the government does not get involved with enforcing, mandating, or promoting particular religious doctrines, even including belief in any gods. So, I haven't read I'm sure you haven't read it. I hadn't read it until I was studying. Since I was in junior high, the 9th grade, in junior high, I had a teacher that took the Constitution. he was a notebook kind of guy. We all had to have notebooks. So we had to take the Constitution of the United States of America, every paragraph, and write it in our own words. So I have not read this until I was studying. So this is what our Constitution says exactly. I'm going to read it. So if I don't mess up, it's what it says exactly, okay? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So the first you've heard is the Establishment Clause. The Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. They don't get to pick what religion everybody in the United States has. That's what that means. It's the Establishment Clause. Government cannot establish religion, although they're trying right now. This is the clause that grants the separation of church and state. It's not supposed to separate the church from the state. It's supposed to separate the state from religion. It's supposed to keep them out of here, not us out of there. I pray for more believers in Congress, in politics, in schools, in places of influence. John talks about the 7 mountains of influence. There should be Christians in every one, and we have backed off because of everybody saying separation of church and state. You think that when they say that, you think you can't even go to the polls and vote according to what you believe. Yes, you can.
Amen. That's right. That's right. How you should vote.
The next clause is the Free Exercise Clause. It says that the Congress cannot make a law prohibiting the free exercise of religion. In other words, they cannot say you cannot go to Protestant churches on Sunday or any time during the week. Now, other nations do. If you don't know that, other nations do.
Right.
In fact, I don't know if England still has a national church. They used to. Russia used to have no church. That's a bunch of baloney, that Christian stuff. Muslim countries, you're either a Muslim or you're dead or a servant.
Right.
That's just the facts, Jack. Religious persecution was for all practical purposes universal during the 18th century and already religiously diverse in the United States. There was immense pressure when the founders founded the Constitution to guarantee that the U.S. government would not require uniformity of belief. That's why we have the freedom. That's why it's there. There's also freedom of speech. I can babble on and say whatever I want to. Right? So can you. You have the freedom to speak. You have the freedom to tell the truth. You have the freedom not to talk. Freedom of speech. What free speech means exactly has varied from era to era. It is noteworthy that within 10 years, get this, 10 years of the Bill of Rights, which is where that was first in before it went into the Constitution, was ratified. President John Adams successfully passed an act specifically written to restrict the speech of supporters of Adams' political opponent, Thomas Jefferson. That's in the United States. That's after the Constitution. And if they did it then, they could do it now. And I thank God that our president is not doing that.
Amen.
And they talk about him, how he shuts up the press. Are you kidding me? The papers, all the national television stuff, all those channels, they can say whatever they want. He might not like it. He says he doesn't like it. He calls them fake news. And some of the times they are. It's called freedom of speech. Also in that same thing, freedom of the press. In the 18th century, do you remember this? Pamphleteers. It's almost like mouseketeers. Pamphleteers like Thomas Paine. I always remember Thomas Paine from school. Were subject to persecution for publishing unpopular opinions. There are no reporters going to jail in the United States of America unless it's for something other than what they write. There are no people shut up. There are no papers shut down except from people like you and me who get our news off of the internet or whatever else. But not from the government. That's not change. That's Trump and the government is not doing anything to make that change. The Freedom of Press Clause makes it free that the First Amendment is meant to protect not only freedom to speak, but also the freedom to publish and distribute speech. Fifth thing in that one amendment, the freedom of assembly, right here. Right here, right now. The right of the people to peacefully assemble. I do have problems with some of the riots and the nonsense going on that are not peaceable.
Amen.
And I do think people should be arrested.
Amen.
That's my opinion. You may have a different one. The right of the people to peacefully assemble was frequently violated by the British in the years leading up to the American Revolution, which is why that is an important piece of our Constitution.
Amen.
The right to petition. Now, this isn't too much today, but back in the day, petitions were a more powerful tool in the Revolutionary era than they are today, as they were the only direct means of redressing grievances against the government. And remember, those had to travel across the ocean to the King of England, and they did nothing about it. Absolutely nothing. And then you remember the Tea Party, and the citizens finally had enough. But the Christian response to all of this, to politics in particular, that I'm talking about today, and probably everybody wished I hadn't, is we need the wisdom. Our response is the three things. We need to pray.
That's right.
We need to pray that men and women in our government would be godly men and women who hear the voice of the Lord, make decisions based on what God wants for our country. Do you know how much a better place we would be in if all of our people in power heard the voice of the Lord, responded to his leading,
Amen.
loved the country,
Amen.
loved the people of the United States,
Amen.
protected and upheld the Constitution,
That's right.
protected the people of the United States.
That's right.
It's amazing.